Millen, who also shared with me, he wanted me to bring this clock, but I told him it was too important and it should stay at his shop. But it was, and I thought this was really amazing, that a lot of antique people probably know this, but I liked his phrasing, that a clock that has a paper trail that you can date and know exactly who built that clock and who owned that clock when, it's way more valuable, 5 times more valuable than another clock. And I thought that was really important, the importance of history and stories. And now Bonnie Gifford will read from an interview by Bill Vannersdale, who lives and has retired in Elkins.
I retired here in Elkins, worked for the Forest Service here for many, many years. I've written a lot about the flash flood of 1949. I was caught in that flood out in Smoke Hole Canyon, and I'm lucky that I made it out alive. I left my car along the road, grabbed all the layers I could, including my Navy pea coat, and headed to the home of Mr. and Mrs. Landis to use their phone. Well, they handed me a pair of dry socks to change into. I was sitting on their front porch with my shoes and socks drying on a rock nearby. The lightning continually swept through the canyon while thunder knocked against the hanging cliffs overhead. Mrs. Landis was standing on the porch, looking out towards the open canyon and watching the storm. She said, "Oh, this world, this world." Mr. and Mrs. Landis were inside the house, and I was still barefooted. An enormous debris slide came hurtling down the ravine from Chimney Top and slammed straight into the Landis home. I was covered with layers and layers of lava and mud and water. I almost died there that night, but somehow the debris started to settle, and I made my way down through the valley. I was all crippled up. I came upon a man who was crying. He'd lost a lot of the cabins he used to rent out to people. I guess a lot of people lost what they had in that flood. And when the 1985 flood hit, I followed every story in the papers, and I wrote it all down. Never on Forest Service time, of course. At home at night, it seems, I was always writing. I guess I've written about 1,000 pages on different floods here in West Virginia. I will always remember seeing Mrs. Landis standing there in her doorway and hear her words, "Oh, this world, this world." I met my wife when I was working for the CCC at the camp about 12 miles from Petersburg, working as a telephone operator. And she, Mary Alice, was working as a telephone operator in Petersburg. Sometimes we would talk for a long time if there was nobody else on the line. This went on for years. I began working for the Forest Service as a transmitter, and we continued to communicate over the line, and we kind of became good friends like this without ever meeting in person. One day we decided we should meet, and Mary Alice decided I should come to the Methodist Church in Petersburg where she went. She said, "Don't you come up to me. I'll walk up to you and say, 'Hi Bill, I'm Mary Alice.'" My friend Chi-Chi drove me in a Forest Service vehicle to that church. I got there and looked around, and my friend Chi-Chi pointed to a little girl off in the corner who was all by herself and said, "That's the girl you're here to see." Her feet didn't touch the floor. She was only a little over 4.5 feet. Well, the service began, and Mary Alice didn't come and say, "Hi, Bill." During the benediction, when everybody's head was down, she must have left, because when I looked up, she'd gone. Cold feet. Well, I figured she hadn't liked what she seen. So when the service was over, me and Chi-Chi headed downtown. There wasn't much you could do in Petersburg, except maybe get some ice cream. And we just walked downtown a little. And then these 2 girls drove up, and Mary Alice jumped out of the car, marched right up to me with her arm out and said, "Hi, Bill, I'm Mary Alice." We got into the back seat of the car while her friend Grace drove. For a while, Mary Mary Alice was just talking to Grace and not talking to me at all, leaning up towards the front seat. Then, after a little bit, I just wrapped my arm around her and nestled her close. And there was no more about Grace after that. And Grace drove us around for over 2 hours. We started seeing each other then a bit. Usually I would visit her at her family's place in Petersburg. And one night, she was standing there, so quiet, and I thought she was looking at the stars. But her eyes were closed, and I thought, oh, she wants me to kiss her. I'd never kissed anybody before, but I did it. I kissed her lips, kind of timidly. And she put her hands on her hips and she said, "Bill, kiss me." And so I did. And boy, I tell you, the stars lit up then, shining overhead like that.